Welcome back to the second part of your favorite Pan-African show, Bottomline Africa, right on KTN News. Now, the U.S. top diplomat Rex Tillerson is on his way back home after brief stopovers to Chad and Nigeria after leaving Kenya today morning. Now, Tillerson led a high-level U.S. delegation from the Trump administration to the four-nation Africa visit as the U.S. takes a fresh look at how it does business with the continent. Here is Esther Gitui from the Voice of America with more.
The trade discussion took place at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce Erin Walsh says the Trump administration has a real appreciation for the economic and strategic importance of Africa.
Economic development across the continent is creating huge demand. Companies from China, India, Turkey, Japan, Europe, and the Middle East are actively pursuing commercial opportunities in Africa, and it is critical for the United States to pivot from an aid-focused to commercial engagement.
Thomas Hardy, the Director of Public Affairs and Congressional Relations at the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, says the agency is uniquely positioned to be a commercial driver to support U.S. industry's efforts and expand business opportunities across the continent.
It's important to look back at the president's national security strategy, where he specifically noted that China's investing in emerging markets to expand their influence and gain a competitive advantage against the United States. He further went on to say, specifically in Africa, that some Chinese practices are undermining Africa's long-term development by corrupting elites, dominating extractive industries, and locking countries into unsustainable debt.
Well, it seems China's investment in Africa is giving the U.S. a very uncomfortable time in the continent. Now, before we start our studio discussion tonight, over to some facts and figures about, the news crumble of Africa. We're going to get them shortly on a screen. Already, trade between Africa and China has grown at a breathtaking pace. It was just $10.5 billion back in the year 2000, $40 billion in 2005, and $166 billion in 2011. In the first half of 2017 alone, they totaled more than $85.3 billion in value. Now, Chinese imports from the African continent, from the report also, has doubled by an estimated 46% compared to the same period a year ago, reaching around $38.4 billion. Now, in 2014, President Uhuru Kenyatta, that is Kenya's president, signed a $3.8 billion contract with the China Roads and Bridge Corporation, a Chinese state-owned construction company, to build phase one of a railway that will eventually extend to Uganda, Rwanda, South Sudan, and Ethiopia. Now, the disputes started almost immediately over financing, land acquisition, and the project's environmental impact. Now, critics of the railway question whether the benefits are worth the debt, and the government now owes to the China Export-Import Bank, which financed 85% of the project. So the U.S. has been criticizing China a lot for such loans that they keep on extending to some African countries, including Kenya. So to contextualize this particular debate for us, we have Abel Uyeyo in studios, the Research Center for African Progress. We also have Abdullahi Boru, who is a Horn of Africa specialist, who is joining me all the way from our City Center studio. Good evening, gentlemen, and welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. Good evening.
So, Abel, let me begin with you. Of course, we have a lot of interest from this, foreign countries, China leading the way. There's the United States, there's the UK, Russia, and of course, India, Brazil. They've also joined the bandwagon, all of them, showing interest in Africa. So let me begin this conversation with Tillerson's visit. And the U.S. says the trip is all about mending and strengthening relations, between the U.S. and African countries. And Abel, I'm sure that you know this. That's not all. It's also about countering Chinese growing influence in the continent, right?
Yes. Well, that is what it is. For quite some time, I think the West felt like Africa didn't have a place to go when it came to things like trade and infrastructural development, because China was asleep. Actually, the East was asleep. Now, over the last, 12 years, China woke up because, of course, due to lack of resources, due to lack of raw materials for the companies, and they felt like, hey, all the raw materials are in Africa, so they decided to come for them. Mm-hmm. Now, this kind of move, of course, caught the Western unawares. They came to Southern Sudan for oil. They went to DRC for minerals, So the West was not prepared for, an energized and strong China. But again, the 8 years of Obama were about, trying to mend fences with parts of the world, of course, where they felt like the U.S. had, offended them. So they didn't keep an eye on China. So they've gotten to realize China has made so much progress, and now they're concerned. And of course, China is not making advances in terms of the economy, just the economy. They've also advanced in terms of the military, and they're concerned, and they have to be balanced.
Yes.
There are serious issues, of course. Talk about the South China Sea, where China is trying again to assert itself. So they have to control the movement of China, not just in Asia, but also in Africa. But I think they've lost it because China has used a different approach, which was not applied by the West during the time, they had all the time.
We're going to talk about China's policy in Africa shortly. Thanks for your input there. Now, Abdullahi, I'm sure this is something that you've written widely on. And why does it seem like, why does China's investment in Africa, it seems to be giving America a lot of sleepless nights?
Thank you, Yusuf. I think part of the reason is, any country would want unfettered access to Africa. And for a very long time, the West has treated Africa as a problem to be solved. But the Chinese have come and said, look, we'll not be asking a lot of questions around democracy, interference in the internal affairs and human rights, but we are going to give you money that you would want to build the roads, railways, large-scale infrastructure project. But I think for me, the challenge for Africa, and also an opportunity, is to look at the Chinese for the hardware and they look to the West for the software. It's an opportunity that, African countries and diplomats and head of missions, wherever they are in all the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, need to be thinking how they can double dip rather than, we are facing East or facing West.
So you're saying this is a unique opportunity for African countries?
Absolutely. If it's done very well, if it's calibrated very well, if African Ministry of Foreign Affairs and ambassadors retool how they think and adjust and adapt for this particular opportunity, it is a massive opportunity. It's not just China, or like you said in the intro, it's not just China or, the West. It's also Turkey, it's UAE, it's Qataris, it's Brazil. So I think it's an opportunity for Africa rather than, getting sucked into should we be facing East, should we be facing West. It's like, where can we get the best deal? And that puts you in a comparative advantage if African countries, figure a way of exploiting this.
Abel, do you agree with Abdullahi that China's policy of, non-interference in the internal affairs of African countries, do you think that is what is propelling them or, giving them traction in the continent?
No, I don't think so. What's actually giving China the unique opportunity to extend its influence in Africa is the greed of African leaders. I want us to realize that the kind of loans extended to African countries are going to be paid over a very long period of time. And actually, once they develop a particular element of infrastructure, they take control of that so as to get back the money. So it might take like 10, 15, or 20 years to have that kind of element. Let's say maybe it's a railroad road to be handed over to the government for purposes of control. Now, so those loans are kind of, let's call it a burden on the shoulders of the receiving countries. And then again, the policy of non-interference does not work well with investments. Let's say a country is headed by a dictator and you move in, you watch as the dictator oppresses citizens, and what you do is to focus on maybe oil and all that. At some point, there will be chaos, and the investment you've made will be destroyed. So their policy is not going to work for them in the long run, of course. In the short term, it can work. And for Africans who want to, of course, advance in terms of economics, in terms of politics and society, that is not sustainable. That is why I think last time when they were taking a lot of oil from southern Sudan, we're turning a blind eye to the chaos, there was a lot of noise. So they have to give a lot of attention to the humanitarian issues, even as they go for the minerals.
Yes, Abdullahi, let me get a quote here for Abdullahi from Rex Tillerson, the U.S. Secretary of State during his tour of Africa. And this is what he said, quote unquote, "We are not in any way," he refers to the U.S. of course, "attempting to keep Chinese investment dollars out of Africa. They are badly needed. However, we think it's important that African countries carefully consider the terms of those investment. And clearly he's talking about, the loans African countries are getting from the Chinese. Do you think from your own point of view, this kind of a deal is sustainable?
I mean, let's be very clear. I mean, in international relations or state or bilateral or trilateral, multilateral relations, there are no free lunch. So if once everybody is very aware of that, I mean, nobody loves Africa so much that they're bringing you free lunch. So that is the line of engagement that we need to be guided by in most of these conversations. I mean, for me particularly, it's not a question of whether China or the West, is where can we get the best deal? That is what is driving. I think to the Secretary of State statement with respect to China, they need to be it should be taken with a pinch of salt, because the Americans are not in the business of giving, Africa something for free, and like that's why I said in my previous explanation that we are probably at a unique position where everybody wants, piece of Africa. How can we make the best out of this situation without necessarily saying this is good, this is bad? I mean, the deals that are on the table right now, whether it's from the Americans as far as counterterrorism and security cooperation is concerned, or from the Chinese as far as, large-scale infrastructure is concerned, they are not outrightly bad, neither are they outrightly good. So it's a question of us saying, look, we will take these from the Chinese. Yes, they are loans. And let's be a bit honest with ourselves. I mean, like in the 80s and 90s, African countries took a lot of loans from IMF and World Bank. So I mean, like that really, depressed the level of growth and development. Similar to the Chinese, they are not in the business of, being philanthropic. These are money that we've got to pay. However, what are the options on the table? Just take an easy example of the Thika Road. I mean, the negotiation for that with EU took so long. But when President Mwai Kibaki went to China during the Afro-Sino-Africa Summit, the Chinese gave the money. Yes, there are problems with them, but that is where now we have to be very careful. That's why I use the analogy of, hardware and software.
And speaking about getting the best deal out of the East-West kind of competition, now, Abel, if you look at some of the figures here from the Chinese investment in Africa, it rose from 10 billion back in the year 2000 to close to $200 billion now. If you look at the companies of Chinese that are operating in Africa, there are more than 2,500. There are about 1 million Chinese who are working in Africa. Apparently, they plan, they do the investment. Even materials are from China. I mean, where's the balance of trade? Because it seems Africa is losing in this kind of a deal.
Yes, exactly. That is the point that I was trying to make. Now, when you engage in trade with a trading partner, it has to be balanced. As we speak now, the trade deficit between Kenya and China is so high. And that is the same song in every African country. I think the only place where it could be balanced is Southern Sudan, and that is because they're taking all the oil from Southern Sudan. Now, in all the trade, African countries engage with the West. For example, the United States. They've put measures in place to make sure there's some kind of balance. I think you remember the African Growth Opportunity, the AGOA thing. It was designed to give Africans a chance to export stuff, for example, to the United States, so as to create some kind of balance to cut the trade deficit. For China, as we speak today, we import up to around 320 billion worth of Chinese products to Kenya, but we export only 8 billion Kenya shillings. You can see a huge deficit. So you can't tell me we're gaining anything from the trade between Kenya and China. And we import even what we produce locally here. Now, the Chinese don't care about whether we providing market for our own locally made products. All they want is to dump their products in our markets. So African countries have to be very, very careful with the kind of trade they're having with China. And I don't think the U.S. Secretary of State said it in bad taste. The Chinese dollars are needed, and they're needed so badly. But then again, Africans have to be very much aware. And again, Africa needs to advance in terms of its governance, in terms of its politics. You can't just focus on the economy because it's not sustainable. You can pump so much money into a country, and then, because of maybe some kind of political mess, all the stuff gets destroyed. So what you have to do is to make sure, as you advance the economy, the politics, the governance is also streamlined. That is why loans from the West, of course, come with some kind of strings attached to make sure as a country gets to develop in terms of, infrastructure and other sectors of the economy, the politics is what's sustainable. The governance is okay. So we have to be very careful with the kind of relationship in terms of trade, of course, we have with the Chinese, because they don't care so much about other areas of life in African countries. And of course, we don't blame the Chinese because that is the kind of system they have back home. It's very rare to find the Chinese questioning the government. Mm-hmm. But again, is it a system of governance that is sustainable? I don't think so.
Yes. Now, Abdullahi, whenever the question of balance of trade is raised, the Chinese government, they normally say that, whatever they're doing in Africa is a win-win situation for both Africa and China. From your point of view, do you think this is some sort of a win-win situation?
I think, like any other country, China, number one, it's looking out for its own interest. Mm-hmm. So the onus, like I said, is on us. So if the Chinese are saying that this is a win-win situation, where is the win for Africa? Mm-hmm. But I just want us to be very honest with ourselves. How much balance of trade does exist between Africa and the West? I mean, like that, it's incredibly negligible. My colleagues spoke about AGOA. Mm-hmm. How about the, dumping of, second-hand clothes for which now, Uganda, Rwanda might be penalized and Tanzania might be penalized. So, I mean, like, let's be very careful when we, when we are looking at the West versus, let's say, Chinese. Mm-hmm. We haven't been in a good position with the West either. I'm not saying because of that, then therefore we move to the East. Secondly, one of the other things that African countries need to be very aware of, nobody's in the business of developing Africa. Mm-hmm. So Africans themselves, what level of trade does exist in Africa? How much is the inter-Africa trade? Like even flights between African countries is a nightmare. Try traveling from, let's say, Kenya to West Africa. It's an absolute nightmare. Look at the tariffs that we impose on each other, each countries. Every time we hear Angola has removed visa for this country, we celebrate. But like we should, that's tyranny of low expectations. Mm-hmm. We need to be moving beyond that and start developing intra-Africa trade. I mean, like you saw some of the goods from Kenya that were banned by Tanzania just the other day. Then one day old chicken. Mm-hmm. I mean, when Africa doesn't put its house in order, what happens is that others tend to take advantage. But
yes.
Also, when negotiating for some, mm-hmm. Sorry, go ahead, Yusuf.
Well said. Now, Abel, as you react to Abdullah's point of view there, apparently it's said that 7 out of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world are in Africa. Do you think this is the reason as to why we're seeing a lot of interest from these foreign countries? And perhaps there are those who are saying that this kind of a growth is fake. It doesn't trickle down to the people. What do you have to say about it?
Well, of course, when we talk about African countries making progress economically, that is good news. Now, I don't think that is the reason why the West is showing, or maybe, foreign countries, maybe East and West are showing a lot of interest in Africa. What's happening is these guys have gotten to a point where they don't have the resource base, the raw materials to support their companies. And, of course, the best place to do that is to come and pick them from Africa. And, they don't care so much. That is, I think, the point where I agree with my colleague. They don't care so much about the progress we're making as a continent. All they care about are the raw materials. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, the West, of course, knows how to conceal or disguise their selfish interests a little bit by, of course, talking about humanitarian issues and all that. China does not, unfortunately. Now, I'll focus on two things. Number one, plastics. Kenya has a lot of potential, and not just Kenya, I think so many African countries, in providing plastic goods. Unfortunately, China does not care about that. They actually they allow a lot of plastic goods to be imported to not just Kenya, but so many other African countries. Number two, we call them low-level steel products. China allows them to actually come to so many African countries despite the ability of those African countries to manufacture them locally. Now, that is how you kill local African industries, and then, of course, you create market for what? For mm-hmm. Chinese products. Over the last 15 years, the products from America and the United Kingdom and France that come to African countries actually focus on what we don't produce as a continent. Again, the loans that come from the West do not come with a lot of, requirements, as it is with the case of China. Okay, so like every business person, China, of course, has its interests, but I think they come with a lot of cold approach. It's not so much about the basic distance we need in terms of business.
Yeah, and speaking about interest, Abel, let me just pose this final question. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Speaking about interest, there's another, shall I call a new player, but I think they've been in Africa also before, that is Russia during the Soviet times. And this is what the Russian foreign minister, Mr. Lavrov, said in Zimbabwe, quote unquote, the modern day Africa is a continent which is developing very fast. So its political and economic importance for international relations is increasing. And Abdullah, apart from Russia, of course, their interest from Turkey as well as India and Brazil. What sort of a strategy should Africa deploy to make sure that they benefit out of these deals, not getting the wrong end of the stick?
The reality is, Yusuf, I mean, trade is part of a statecraft. I mean, the Ministry of Trade in countries that you've mentioned, whether it's the United States, China, or Russia, is a very strong ministry because that is how you build, and these things are coupled with, your foreign ministries. I think what needs to happen is, during some of these, bilateral, trilateral, or even multilateral discussions, African countries need to get their agenda. So they shouldn't be reacting to, oh, Mr. Lavrov is in town, so this is what we want. It has to be proactively built at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to ensure that there are enough competencies that has been built over the years of people who understand international trade. International trade is largely around comparative advantage. What is it that I can give you that I can get something from you? So when we do not do that, when we look at ourselves as inferior, then we end up getting the short end of the stick. And that is a function of us not looking at trade as part of diplomacy. I mean, look at the State Department and probably the Secretary for Trade. These are the people behind him. I mean, the cadre of people that they come with whenever they travel. These are people who are extremely competent. Secondly, I think the other area that we need to be very, very careful is negotiating from point of strength, and that can come from, let's say, for instance, EAC negotiating, at a very macro level, a broad trade deal with, let's say, the West and China. But then, at the individual countries, of course, you have your peculiar nuances that you can work around. In absence of that, I think a country like Rwanda, I mean, like it's a very small country. Like if they go for trade negotiation, for instance, with China, I mean, like which is 40, 50 times their size, it becomes very difficult to get an optimal deal.
Well said, Abdullah. I think African countries should make use of their regional bodies, as we've already mentioned. Abel, let me give you the last word. You have only a minute to react to that.
Africans have to be very, very careful with the kind of trade, agreements they come up with when engaging, especially with the West. And of course, I'm very comfortable with looking West, as we've always done. You can see when the Americans come in, they don't just come in for trade. They actually support us when it comes to issues like security. They've been very, very instrumental in fighting terror. They actually do that on their own. What they need from us most of the time are our bases. So when the Chinese come in, they don't find time to address the problems we face as a country. And that is the kind of behavior they have in almost all the African countries where they're doing business. So I think we still have to consider the West more than the East until the East, of course, convinces us that they take our interests as a continent seriously. So far, the West is best.
I think that's a debate that will continue, not just here, but even on social media. And earlier, we did ask our viewers if they we would like to know from them if they think Africa stands to gain from the renewed interest by the West and China. We did ask, do you think Africa stands to gain from the renewed interest by the West and China? Just 41% of you said yes, and 59% of you said no. I'm going to go through some of them shortly. And that Steve Mulwa says, yes, those developed countries have more experience in ideas and products and even services,